Hello job seekers, Melanie here again with CGL Recruiting, and today we're going to be focusing on how to ask for an informational interview. Now this is actually part 2 in a series that we're doing, so if you don't know what an informational interview is, please go back and watch that video that is on our YouTube channel. Before we get started, if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. If this data is helpful, give us that thumbs up and share this information with another job seeker. So let's talk about informational interviews and how you actually ask for them. And we're going to actually focus on how you ask for them from 5 different people. One is a friend or connection. The second is HR. The third is somebody in the same profession as you. The fourth is somebody that went to the same school as you. And the last is, how do you ask for an informational interview from a stranger? So stick with us to the end, and I promise you it'll be worth it to get information on how to ask from all those 5 individuals. Okay, let's start by looking at somebody who is a friend or a connection that is somebody part of your network. Now, in this case, when you're asking for an informational interview, you're going to want to make the connection based on your friendship or on your network connection. So for example, let's say it's somebody that's not a close friend, but somebody that you met at a networking event and you've stayed in touch with. An easy way to structure this would be to, hi Melanie, we met at the OCI meeting and I can see you work for this company. I was very interested in this organization and was wondering if I could speak with you further about potentially doing an informational interview. Would you be available for a cup of coffee? Now, in this case, you're looking for a much more casual interaction than you're going to be with some of the other informational requests that we're going to make. So in this one, don't necessarily think that you have to be looking for an informational interview inside the company. You can get just as much great data and put yourself up for success by trying to meet the individual outside of their employment, maybe for lunch, maybe for, like I said, a cup of coffee, or for some other outside event. And then you're still going to be able to get the great data from that informational interview. Now, we are having a second or a third video in this series, which is going to cover through the best questions for you to ask during an informational interview and talking about the actual structure of it. So, friend or connection, you want to make sure you're focusing on the personal connection and look at potentially doing something outside of the company as a different way of getting the interview. Let's focus in on the second audience that you can request informational interviews for, and that is HR or human resources. Now, as an HR person, I actually think this is the hardest route for you to go. There are some companies that do have informational interviews as part of their talent acquisition strategy, but they're not as many, I think, today with so many people in the market. As we're recording this, it's September of 2020, and so the job market is the worst it has been in years. So if you're looking at approaching HR, the trick is to make sure that they realize that you're approaching them not for an interview for a job, but for an informational interview. And that is a very, very fine line. So if you're requesting this type of interview, the very first thing I'm going to recommend to you is do not include your resume in the email that you send them. If you do, there's a good chance they're going to quickly look as they're going through hundreds of emails from candidates a day and think it's another candidate, put them in our system. So do not include your resume is my advice when you're requesting an informational interview from HR. Absolutely. Okay, now how do you actually approach HR? Remember, HR people are most times stewards of the culture of the organization. So I think it is best a lot of times to approach them through that lens. An example of how you could do that is to send an email saying, hi Melanie, I saw you're a part of the HR team for this company, and I'm very interested in some of the vision, mission, values, and culture of your organization. I am trying to learn more about the organization in general and wondered if you would be willing to have some time to speak with me in more of an informational interview setting where I could learn more about the company going forward. Now, again, HR is asked for interviews very, very commonly every day. So I don't think this is your best path, but it is one that you definitely should still try. Try to open that door and see if you're able to make that connection to get an informational interview. Okay, let's talk about the third, which is going to be individuals in the same profession. Now, when you're trying to get an informational interview with somebody in the same profession, you want to stay away, I always believe, from the word informational interview even. What you want to do is focus in on what you have in common from your profession. So let's say that you are both engineers. You can reach out to somebody that's in that same profession and say, I see that you're a mechanical engineer with XYZ company, and I am very, very interested in the following product that you did or the way that you all have approached this. I was wondering if you would be willing to have a time where we could have a conversation about the different engineering functions that you do and that your company is doing, so I could learn and understand more as I continue to grow in my engineering career. Now, this is where you're trying to make that connection based on your mutual love or your mutual passion for what you do. I think if you start putting in the word interview, an informational interview, you may lose some people. So I think it's better to do the approach first to get that connection on the professional side. Now, before you do this one's going to require you to do research on that actual professional function within that organization and that person is doing. The same way when you're going after HR, you're going to have to do some research on the mission, vision, culture, and their talent acquisition side of the company. Focus on all things HR. This one, you're trying to focus on all things on your mutually shared profession. And this is also a great time to see if that person, let's say they are engineering and they had any kind of patents or they have where they've done speaking in engagements. Let's say if they are in an accounting position and they have done something where they've spoken at some conference on something with an accounting principle. That's a great way to make a connection with somebody in your profession and gives you an opening point to ask for this type of connection. All right, let's move on to number 3. I lost count. Number 4. We're on number 4, which is someone who is in the same school as you, or went to the same school as you, I should say. Okay, so this is very similar to the one of the profession, but instead of making the connection on your mutual profession, you want to make the connection on your mutual alma mater that you went to. I don't care if it was high school, a technical school, college, university, but this is your chance to say, like for example, I went to UT. I could reach out to somebody else that went to UT within that organization and say, hey, I see that you are also a fellow Longhorn, Hook 'em Horns, and I was hoping to talk with you about maybe the company that you work for. It is something that I think is very interesting in the industry that they're in, and I was wondering if you would be willing to have a time where the two of us could get together. I would love to learn more about your company and what you do there. And again, the answer here is not to ask for a job. That's not what we're doing. You need to make sure completely you're structuring this as an informational interview at this point in the game. Now, when you're doing this alma mater connection, it is always great if, again, you get to go into the company and see the offices and stuff like that, but it is just as fine to meet somebody for a cup of coffee, a lunch, a breakfast, whatever works for you. Or if you cannot, for somebody at your alma mater, seem to get that yes connection, a good way to do this is lots of colleges and universities have alumni organizations. And you can ask for a meetup with that person at one of their alumni events. And don't think that you have to look at alumni events that are in the same city where you went to college or university. For example, I went to college in Austin, Texas, but I live now in Houston, Texas. And guess what? There is a UT alumni branch here in the city where I live and work. So make sure you are considering, when you're doing that alumni, not just doing it via email or phone, but doing it also of getting that alumni connection through some of those alumni organizations. Okay, let's talk about the hardest way to get an informational interview, but one that can be the most rewarding, and that is a total stranger. How do you approach a total stranger on asking for an informational interview? Well, here are some tips and tricks of how I recommend you do it. Now, the one way is definitely to meet that total stranger through some other type of event, whether it's a networking event or we are going to a seminar or a conference, and find out just information about them and the company. You're not really going to know this person. You may have just met them a little bit. But if you're able to get their information, their contact data, then what you can do is actually email that person or call them if you have their phone and say, hey, after we briefly met at this organization, I was really intrigued by your company and what you all do. And I was wondering if you would be open for us to have a further conversation, a further informational type interview where I could ask you more information about what you all do and the company and your role there and the different departments and such, and try to get that connection that way. Now again, I realize we are still in a lot of social distancing parameters in 2020, so a lot of this does have to be done via phone and email. And that's okay. In some ways, you can hit a broader audience when you're doing it that way than when you're trying to do it other ways. But when you're doing that stranger, it's about trying to get a connection quickly. So here are some other ways that you can do it, trying to get an informational interview from a stranger. Another way is if that person does some kind of activity post, whether that's on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram or whatever, react to that post. And I'm not talking about just giving it a thumbs up or some other emoticon like that. I am talking about trying to engage the individual in a conversation or a discussion on that platform. So they post something about a brand new product that their organization is coming out in. You comment back onto that post saying, that is incredibly interesting to me. Can you tell me more about this? And try to get the conversation going through that platform. And then once you start showing your interest and you know that they're interested in sharing information back, then you have an opening to contact further with that person and ask for this type of informational interview. Now, informational interviews are got to be brave. You have to be bold to go forward and ask for these and look for these. I definitely recommend during the process, at no point in time do you come off saying, I'm a job seeker and I was hoping to have an informational interview. You have to focus the energy on, I'm interested in your company, I'm interested in your product, I'm interested in your profession, and I was hoping to maybe have an informational interview to talk with you further about it. Okay, now I would like you to put a comment down below and tell me which method or which audience, I should say, have you found the most success with when you're trying to do an informational interview? Is it the friend connection? Is it HR? Somebody in the same profession? Somebody who went to the same school as you? Somebody who is a total stranger? Or something else? I look forward to reading all of your comments below, and make sure and watch out for video number 3 in this series, which is going to talk about the best questions to ask during your informational interview. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.